Hello, welcome to another episode of Namtaro Talks. Yes, I kind of like a not really love-hate relationship with what I do, but sometimes I hit the procrastination bug. But it's alright. Today I not really buckle down, but also get the motivation to make this episode. Well, it's fun because it's a broad topic. Video games. Yay, yippee. Yeah, I'm not gonna talk everything about video games or about all the video games out there. I'm just talking about my experience and relationship with video games. And I am making this episode right now while my wife's in the background playing Stardew Valley. As a matter of fact, that was quote unquote one of our first dates. I just sat there and watched her play Stardew Valley for about an hour or two, and I just remember a lot of digging and exploring caves and like chickens and milk and farming and like giving letters to people so that you try to build relationships with them. But it's not really my thing. The thing about my episodes is that I talk about formative years pretty often. That literally could be anything. That could be before school, elementary, middle, or even high school. But one of the first exposures I had to video games was Street Fighter. Yep, I played Street Fighter with my cousins on the Sega Genesis. Yeah, Street Fighter 1 and 2. Yep, Sega Genesis. I remember back then you had cartridges and you gotta blow into the cartridges if the game's not working very well. Of course, my first video game exposure was through my cousins because at that young age my parents didn't allow for video games because they thought it was distracting and violent. But the funny thing is, later in life, I find distracting and violent things anyways. Just kidding. Yep, I remember cycling through all the Street Fighter characters. Of course, the easy fireball people like Ryu and Ken. And Chun-Li was easy. You just press one button and she kicks a lot. Or say for Blanca, he starts electrocuting people. Some people were harder to execute like Zangief and Bison. We played Street Fighter 1, Street Fighter 2. I think Street Fighter 2 had Cammy and Vega. I like those two. They were cool also. And of course, they played little Sonic the Hedgehog with Sonic and Tails running around, collect the rings. Fight Dr. Robotnik or Eggman. Either way works. And the funny thing is, we eventually got our own games and consoles, but we're not really keeping up with the Joneses, but kind of a little late to the party. Not super late, but just show up later than other people. Because the cousins got the Game Boy Colors first and the Pokemon games first, and then we eventually got it too. Though the funny thing is, I remember one time I literally found a Pokemon Red version on the ground at school. Well, and the funny thing is, I didn't even have a Game Boy at the time. Oh, quote unquote, fine. Yeah, I know a kid probably lost it somewhere. Look, it was literally on the ground, okay? I mean, if you're that careless to lose a video game cartridge that was like $50 back then that's on you. Yeah, and based on my cousins, I kind of learned to play a Pokemon the right way. Well, quote unquote, the right way is getting a team of 6 and training the Pokemon relatively evenly. Because I remember in elementary school, some of the kids let me borrow their Pokemon games to play and check it out for a little bit, and they had like a level 20 Charmeleon and a level 3 Rattata, and that's their team, pretty much. At that point, you're screwed because your Pokemon is too strong to weaken them to catch more, and then the other Pokemon are too weak, and you barely even have a team, and you're so far ahead in the game, and you gotta backtrack in order to train the weak Pokemon again. So those kids were screwed, pretty much. But you get your team of 6, and you train them, and then try to diversify. It's like a stock portfolio, like the different types, different attacks. And I could go on and on about Pokemon. Well, it was really fun, to say the least, because you're going on adventures, you're leveling up, you're strategizing, you're following along with your peers. You kind of customize based on what teams that you want to build. And back then, we didn't have like the Bobapedia or Cerebi.com, so we had no idea about databases and EV training and whatnot. All we knew were some cheats from word of mouth or from the Pojo magazine or Pojo.com or GameFAQs. Yeah, I'm sure if I have a Gen Z or Gen Alpha audience, which I doubt I do, they're like, what the heck is he talking about? Okay, on a side tangent, I don't know if you can hear the cat meowing in the background. If you do, well, she's just begging for food because the vet said that she was a bit chubs, so the wife's like toning down her diet a little bit. And I won't ponder with Pokemon for too much, but yeah, generations 1 and 2, those were like the most that I am most nostalgic with, that I hold the most memories with, because a lot of the music's cool, the gameplay is cool, and you fight the gym leaders with like kind of the bosses, and you gotta fight the Elite Four straight, and then you learn to cheat, you learn to build your level 100 teams, and then Gen 2, you got the Johto League, you fight all 8 gyms there, then you gotta fight the Kanto League again, all the 8 gyms again, so that's another 6 gym leaders, and of course you catch the legendary Pokemon, then you gotta fight Red at the top of Mount Silver. And I dabbled in a couple of future generations then, and a couple of remakes after that. But it's not just quite the same, I remember hunching over in the dark. Or, like those Game Boys, they have those portable lights that you can plug into. And, yeah, in the dark, with just that single light to play Pokemon. Or with the link cable, and that's how you trade Pokemon and battle Pokemon. I remember at one point I put like 100 hours into one of the games. Yeah, so I found a red version, but then my dad bought me a yellow version. But then I found out in the yellow version, the gym leaders are slightly harder, and you can't use the cheats. And Pikachu was cool because like he hangs around you, right behind you whenever you walk, but you can't evolve him, and it's like a novelty of anything. But truth be told, the first console and console games we really owned was Crash Bandicoot on the PlayStation 1. Because back then my dad, he worked for Sony, and I'm very sure he didn't get it for free, but probably got a huge discount. Yeah, so Crash Bandicoot, like running through the levels, it's kind of like hallway platforming, and back then he literally only had 2 moves, like the jump and the spin. That's it. All those extra moves he got in the future games, like the body slam and the slide. And back then you could only play as Crash, and you fight all the unique bosses, like this fat tiki guy, like Papu Papu, and of course Dr. Neo Cortex is the main boss of all the games. In the future games, you get to ride motorcycles, jet skis, polar bears, tigers, boulders chase you, Triceratops chase you. You get to play as Crash's sister Coco. Yeah, it really opens up the world from there. Personally, my favorite game was Crash Bandicoot 3, or Warped. Meanwhile, while my brother and I had Crash Bandicoot on the PS1, my cousins, the majority of them had the Nintendo 64. And of course, the main game we played on that was Super Smash Brothers, the first one, with only 12 characters. I remember the first match it was between my brother and I. I was Mario and he was Pikachu. Actually, it was the other way around. But because those were literally the only 2 characters we knew at the time. And then we had to get used to the mechanics of the percentage and the damage and the knockbacks and the platforming and the double jump and the recovery. But most family gatherings, it was a lot of Smash Brothers. And Smash Brothers mainly on the GameCube, but that was later. And of course, my brother and I, we sucked at it because we didn't have the game at home to practice with. Like, our cousins kicked our butts all the time. So I relish whenever I scored a single victory over my cousin. And we can't go without telling the story of having the youngest cousin. We give him a controller. We pretend he's playing on the screen, but the controller's unplugged. So he thinks he's playing, but he's really not. But eventually he got old enough and caught on with that. Yeah, my cousins, not only did they have Smash, but Diddy Kong Racing. That was fun. With all the different characters. Of course, you got Donkey Kong, Diddy Kong, and Tip Top the Turtle, Pipsy the Mouse. A bunch of other random ones. And of course, you don't just drive cars, you also race boats and race planes. And I remember there was this one boss called the Whiz Pig, which was really fast, really cheap, really OP. And no one could really beat him. And of course, you got your Mario Parties 1, 2, and 3. And one of the cousins had a GoldenEye, which was a first-person shooter on the N64. Personally, I didn't really play it as much or know much about it. I just knew there was a guy named Oddjob, and he throws a hat at you. And if they shoot you, you die. Your whole, it's all split screen, and your section of the screen, it just bleeds red. Yeah, that kind of creeped me out a bit back then. And of course, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Huh, I myself never played that game, but I've seen my cousins play it so often I have a general idea of what's going on. I see them get those three relics at the beginning in order to make it to the Temple of Time, and you fight all like the bosses and all the different settings, like Kakariko Village, like my cousin called it Cuckoo Village, and of course all the Hyrule Temple and the market and the Lost Woods. And then once young Link becomes an adult Link, you gotta go to all the different temples and learn all the ocarina songs. And of course, us Asian kids, yep, I'm Asian. You can already know. Yeah, we try to play the ocarina songs on the piano, of course. But that's another good thing about the games back then. The music, it's I don't know how you classify something as objectively good, but it's just more memorable. It's memorable to these days, and a lot of millennial or nostalgic gamers who are more musically inclined, they cover these songs, they make remixes of these songs. I also remember a lot of stealth missions in Ocarina of Time. Like one time you gotta sneak through the maze at Zelda's castle and pass all the guards in order to get to Zelda. And then I think another time when you end up in jail and you have to get out of the tower and shoot the Gerudos in order to sneak past them also. Of course, on the Game Boy Color, we couldn't just only play Pokemon. I don't know how we got Tetris. I think my dad bought it also. But yeah, that was our introduction to Tetris. And I remember one trip to Hawaii. My older cousin, he had I think 10 years on me, and he was really good at Tetris, and I made him a bet. Oh, I can beat you at Tetris. And he said, I'm not going to steal money from a little kid. And good thing he didn't go through with that bet, because his score was much better than mine. He got much farther than I did. Yeah, that older cousin, he had a PS1 also, but he played a bit more mature games. Well, Mortal Kombat at the time, that's considered a bit more mature with all the gore and the fatalities. Twisted Metal too, in a way. It's like when cars attack each other, and you have that one guy with the ice cream truck, Sweet Tooth, with the flaming head or something like that. The interesting thing is, after we moved to our new home, we met one of our peers or friend in the neighborhood, and he just supposedly let us borrow the Nintendo 64, but he never really asked for it back. I think it's because he was really obsessed with his GameCube. So that's when we really practiced Smash 64. For fun anyways, but that was a bit outdated at the time. And he also let us borrow his GameCube briefly too, but that we gave back. And after the Game Boy Color, you get the Game Boy Advance and the Game Boy SP, which is similar a lot later. And one of the first game we got on that was Super Mario 2. Yeah, which is the one where it's a bit funky because it's not just like Mario with the fireballs and going up and down the pipes, because you get to play as Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Toad, but they all have different powers and abilities. Like Luigi has a weird jump and Peach has the floating jump. And you pull turnips or other vegetables out of the ground and you throw them at people. Well, Shy Guys and Birdo and whatever else. And then we discovered the world of emulators. Oh wow, and that opened up a whole nother can of worms for us. We downloaded so many ROMs of Sony games. Of course, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, even the Super Nintendo, the SNES, or we called it the SNES sometimes. And with emulators, you discover save states. So you find out that you screw up, or if a boss is too hard, you can just go back to a few seconds before. And of course, the games were free. So okay, we played the Pokemon games again, but unfortunately there was only one desktop computer, so we had to take turns using it. I remember my brother and I each had separate files for Pokemon Gold. As a matter of fact, yeah, Pokemon Gold and Silver, we played on the emulator. We didn't play on the Game Boy itself. But unfortunately on the emulator, you can't trade Pokemon, and some Pokemon you need to trade to evolve. So I was stuck with a Haunter and a Gengar. Oh, no. A Graveler, yeah, for the longest time. And a Kadabra. Yeah, my brother, he really liked that one RPG, Golden Sun. Personally, I gave it a crack at it, but I was not into it as much, and he had more aptitude and dedication to it. He beat the game, but I have a general idea of the characters and the abilities, and the genie that you gotta level up of each elemental, level 1, level 2. And the music was classic, of course. And then there was Golden Sun 2, where you get 4 new characters, but then eventually you meet the 4 old characters, and then it's like an RPG. And in order to beat some of the sections, you gotta like I don't know, you do these spells, and these giant hands come out and they do stuff, like they move things around or lift stuff out for you. And I was like, how the heck does anyone figure this out on their own? I remember my brother going on a GameFAQs.com a lot in order to beat Golden Sun 1 and 2. But one of my personal favorites was Fire Emblem. Yeah, which one was it? Oh, the one with Eliwood and Lynn and Hector, you know? Not the Sacred Stones. That's the one after. That's the one with Erica and Ephraim. But, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It's not the one with Roy, and that was still in Japanese, although they translated it later, but then Roy was not very good in that game. Yeah, but all the tactics, all the classes, and you figure out the rock, paper, scissors system, and so many characters, and each with, like, funky names. Like, there was a dude named Bath, and then another dude just named Garcia, like, the last name, that was his name. And, of course, there was Jafar the Thief, and everyone liked him. But that's the cool thing about video games. The peers got into it, the cousins got into it. There's some like relatability, and you can talk and discuss and compare and battle and test each other's skills and share. Yeah, honestly, I don't know how we got Final Fantasy 9. I don't know if my dad bought it or someone let us borrow it. But oh wow, that was a really fun game. It was like, my brother and I played it. My 2 other cousins played it. And that's one of the reasons that I bonded with my wife, because we can reminisce about Final Fantasy 9. The music and the unique Renaissance medieval setting, but with its own magic structure. It's not too much like industrialized mecha cyberpunk, you know. Though the dumb thing about the PlayStation 1 and 2 was that you required memory cards. Oh my god. If you did not have a memory card, you can just might as well not play the game, because you could never save. You just play as much as you can until you're bored, and then you just restart. And if you lost the memory card, oh my god, that was you're screwed, pretty much. Or the memory card got corrupted. I know I go on all these little tangents and stories, but I remember, yeah, and back then, the games that were too big, you gotta separate them into many different CDs. You know, Final Fantasy 7 had 3 CDs, 8 and 9 had 4 CDs. And oh my god, I was not happy because the boss at the end of the first disc, it was this like knight named Beatrix, and she had all these OP moves. And after you beat her, there was one final cutscene, but then I guess the disc was scratched or something's wrong with the PS1. It would freeze on that final cutscene, so it would not save, and I can't move on to the second disc, and so I had to like try to beat her again. This happened at least 3 or 4 times. Yeah, and then another friend let us borrow Final Fantasy 7. That's another one I didn't really play. My brother played it and beat it. But it was good for its time, but it was a bit blocky, you know what I'm saying? And I like the graphics and the dialogue and the characters in Final Fantasy 9 more than 7. Final Fantasy 8, it was fine too, and I played a little bit of it, but it felt kind of clunky, in my opinion. But when we moved on to Final Fantasy 10 on the PS2, wow, I was like mind blown, because it was easier to heal, easier to save, the graphics were better, the characters talk. I remember I spent like an entire winter break on that game, like two weeks worth, and over 100 hours. But then again, Final Fantasy X, it had that weird dress sphere. No, not dress sphere. That's Final Fantasy X2, which I played later too. But then Final Fantasy X, it had like the spear grid, and you gotta go around on the grid. But if you go around the grid wrong, you upgrade the people wrong, and then they're not strong enough by the time you get to the final boss. And that's what happened to me. Not to mention I couldn't find the ultimate secret weapons for all the characters. I feel like you have to find them in order to win. Yeah, Final Fantasy X, I made it to the second to last boss, which was Titus's dad, Jack. But it was a pain in the butt because he had these 2 swords that kept healing him. And you could destroy the swords, but sometimes they repair themselves. So you gotta destroy the swords, then destroy Jack at the same time. And of course, Final Fantasy games, they got the music. Yeah, 7, you got Eris's theme. 8, you got Eyes on You, Eyes for You, something like that. Eyes on Me, something like that, by Fei Wong, some Cantonese singer. Final Fantasy 9, oh my god, Melodies of Life. Oh, that was crazy, because it's like the song on the world map, you know? And at the end, you're like, oh my god, this got lyrics? Woo, that's awesome. Final Fantasy 10, you got Suteki Dane, and of course that one scene where like Titus and Yuna were in like the pond, and there was like a romantic scene there. Okay, they just kissed, alright? They didn't do anything else, but still, it was better graphics, and it's not just implied anymore, you know? You actually see it. And of course, there was that one awkward scene where Titus was like, ha 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 ha, and that's the thing about old video games, or video games in general, or anything nowadays, because they become memes, they become jokes, they become recurring and part of the internet culture. Yeah, but the Super Nintendo emulator, two main games that I played on that was Super Mario World, where you get to ride Yoshi sometimes, and if Yoshi gets the fire flower, like Yoshi starts to breathe the fire itself, and you get the cape. Okay, that's not the one with the raccoon hat. That was a different game. I didn't play that one. But Super Mario World, it was a bit hard to beat. So what we did with the save states. So yeah, sometimes it makes me commend the people who played it on the original console back then. They played it without the save states, and it's just a lot of hard work and dedication and practice and muscle memory and recognizing patterns in order to beat it. Because back then, that's all they had, you know? But oh my god, like Mega Man X, that was pretty challenging to me. And that was with save states too. And I had to like look up on GameFAQs on the different strategies and in which order to beat the bosses in order to get the specific weapons that was the weakness of the subsequent boss. And I admit it, I could not beat Sigma at the end, even with the save states. And then I found out there was like Mega Man X2, 3, 4, all the way up to like 9? 8 or 9? Maybe even 10, I forgot. But of course they changed consoles, like X2 and 3 I believe were still on the Super Nintendo. And then after that, they branched onto the PlayStation. The cousins played Mega Man NT Warrior Network Transmission. And that was unique because everyone has like a 3x3 grid on 9 squares, and you have to like run around and fight back and forth and shoot specific weapon cards at each other. Man, I like video games. My cousins, they were really into it. Like every family gathering, they just whip out their portable devices and just play the heck out of it. But we weren't limited to consoles and emulators. We eventually found online games. Of course, there were like the website browser games like Neopets. And there were girls, they played like Gaia Online, and some kids played RuneScape, which I didn't really get into as much. But the two that like me and my peers mainly played were Gunbound and MapleStory. Yeah, Gunbound, like, you don't know, it's like you are a unique machine and you shoot a certain projectile at your friends. But the thing is, that game took really long because everyone has like a waiting period to shoot projectiles. So there's like 1-on-1 games, 2-on-2, even 4-on-4. But if one guy's AFK, like you gotta wait his entire duration every turn. And you shoot someone, if you miss and they hit, you're pretty much screwed because you're at a disadvantage. And sometimes there are special weapons, like you shoot twice or you teleport. And there are rankings in Gunbounds too. I remember you start off as a chick, then there's like stone hammer, double hammer, then the axe, double axe, and then different like silver axe, gold axe, and then double-sided, and then some wands, and then the top players were dragons or something. Apparently the top players were from Vietnam briefly for some reason. And MapleStory, I did not get into it as much as my friends did, but I remember like running around with those like chibi anime characters with the giant eyes, and you gotta kill mushrooms and stumps and slimes. There was a whole bunch of other games that I didn't really play, but I heard about them, like Ragnarok, Survival Project. And most of the guys my age, they played Counter-Strike, but I didn't know how to obtain Counter-Strike, or I didn't have the means to play it. And of course, you're under the jurisdiction of your parents, and they let you slide for certain things, but they wouldn't let me play FPS really, which might have been for the better because I found out that FPS give me a motion sickness when I play, and I suck at them. I can't really aim. I'll be honest with you. One of my goals per episode is to reach about 30 minutes. Yeah, I know that some episodes may not get there as easily, or some might get there pretty easily, and I try not to overstay my welcome. Because there was that one episode where it was only 16 minutes, and I was not too happy about that. Well, I'm not going to try to milk for time, but I am very sure I would not cover... I would go way over 30 if I talk about everything. And honestly, talking about making an episode, it gets pretty tiring sometimes. You just think it's talking, but I guess some people have the capacity for it than others, and I am the others for sure. And it doesn't help but when you're a type B introvert like myself, and I really am one. I know like some super talkative people who are out there and outgoing, and they're like, I'm type B. I'm like, really? Oh yeah, I'm an introvert. I'm like, are you sure? Well, it's okay. The last main topic I'll talk about in this episode will be fighting games. Yes, and of course I talked about Street Fighter and Smash Brothers. Though unfortunately, some people might not classify Smash Brothers as a fighting game, but personally I do. I mean, it's two sides, and at least several opponents, and you're fighting. You're trying to knock them off or decrease their HP or whatnot. But another world of fighting games that I liked were the ones I saw in the arcade, and that would be X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom 1, and especially Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Yeah, I remember back then there was a mini golf place, and they had their own arcade, and they had all of those like fighting games on there, and it would have like those introduction screens, and you see all the different crossovers and all these superheroes and all these characters from Capcom that you would not expect, or some I never even knew about. Yeah, well, that's the thing about these crossover games. They introduced you to many other series. Like, you learn about different games that are out there, different stories and series that are out there. Like, back then, I see Iron Man in passing. I saw Doctor Doom in passing. I mean, I don't really watch or read Fantastic Four, but I know more of their backgrounds nowadays. And it kind of introduced you into, like, the Marvel universe later. And, of course, with the Capcom side... Now, we know about the Street Fighters, and they had a lot of representation, but I didn't know about Darkstalkers, you know? I didn't know there was this, like, funky fighting game with this gothic, dark theme where, honestly, there are some characters that are like a Bumblebee or a Abominable Snowman or an Automaton or this guy with the beads, and he has, like, a little girl that hangs around with him, and this zombie who's also a rock star. Yeah, so that would be Darkstalkers, but I wouldn't have known about them if I didn't get into the Marvel vs. Capcom series. Yeah, so you see these like flashing at the arcade, and of course a couple of friends had the emulators on the computer. But by the stroke of magic and luck, I managed to get Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for the PlayStation 2 for $40 at GameStop. I think it was used, though to my displeasure, I did not know that you had to unlock the characters. You unlock them by, you had to beat the game several times, and you get a limited amount of points, and you gotta use those points to buy the characters. And of course, some of the characters were super expensive, especially the joke ones near the end, like Surfbot and Dan. But 56 characters, now that's a roster. That's a well-represented roster. Though some of the choices are a bit questionable, like the two Wolverines. Like there's regular Wolverine and Bone Claw Wolverine. Not to mention they had a couple original characters like Ruby Hart, who's a pirate, and Amingo, who's like this weird cactus dude. Yeah, because the thing about the arcade, I mean, you don't really get to practice. You gotta show up and you gotta put in quarters, and you just press some buttons and that's it. But when you have the game at home on a console, you get to practice, you get to experiment, you get to check this out, that out, try these combos, try these assists, try these attacks. You get to actually go through the arcade mode. Yeah, and the final bosses for these games, they were pretty interesting. Marvel vs. Capcom 1 was Onslaught. Or maybe that was X-Men vs. Street Fighter. I don't remember. But yeah, but Onslaught is the combination of Charles Xavier and Magneto. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, the final boss was Abyss, which was an original character. But he had three forms. The first one is this armor, the second one is this like liquid humanoid guy, and the third one is like this dragon in like a nuclear waste reactor or something, and he jumps around at you. But yeah, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I played that with some friends, I played it with my cousins. Personally, I like the teams where easy controls, you know, it's like quarter circle forward, quarter circle backwards, maybe the dragon uppercut for like the anti-air. My favorite, well, I didn't really optimize the teams. I know there were some like S tier characters like Storm and Sentinel, but I just played with my personal favorites, like Morrigan, Gambit, sometimes Rogue, sometimes Spider-Man, and Sakura. It's like that little teenage girl that hangs around Ryu. Sometimes even Venom, and Captain America, because he's pretty easy to use. Yeah, for me it was fun, but I never really learned how to do air combos or multi-chain combos and optimize all the assists. And the thing about the Marvel vs. Capcom games and X-Men vs. Street Fighter, they were locked in limbo for the longest time. Like there was no way for the masses to access them as easily. You either had to have the old consoles or the old emulators or the old game discs or cartridges and whatnot. But recently they had the Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection, which had all the aforementioned games all in one convenient package for many different consoles. And my wife has a PS5, or she has a 4 and a 5, but I got it for the 5. And honestly, I don't play it as much, but just having it takes me back, you know, it takes me back to the arcade and just trying to figure it out on the PS2 controllers and being in the training room and experimenting with different characters. And I'm a bit older, so I got a little bit of disposable income. I got to buy my own fight stick. Though it's like the one without the joystick, it's like a buttons on for directional controls and for attacking. Though it was a pain in the butt to format in order to fit the usage of the game. But that's the thing about games, accessibility. And also, some games, they may not withstand the test of time because they're a little bit time consuming, like the active time battle systems in Final Fantasy, or sometimes like the graphics don't really withstand the test of time. But that's why there are many remakes, HD remasters, to kind of introduce those classics to the next generation, you know? It can't just all be AAA games. And of course there are some Steam games and indie games, but these games, they got to have started somewhere, you know? They have a place in their own history that contribute to the video game culture and zeitgeist. Well, anyways, I guess this will be considered video games part 1. Yeah, so part 2 will be coming sooner than later. Though, I don't know if I have enough to fill another half hour, but we'll find out. I'm pretty sure I will. I always find things to talk about. That's the good thing about this kind of format. I can talk extemporaneously. But after a while, you kind of see the limits of my vocabulary. Well, anyways, thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in Video Games Part 2. See you next time. Bye.